I am Associate Director of El Instituto, which is the Institute for Latino, Caribbean, and Latin American Studies. And are rounding out the team at UCONN is Dr. Fiona Vernal, who, as Tom mentioned, is co-coordinator for this project this year, but is also a joint appointment in history and teaches African and African-American history at UCONN, and is jointly appointed in Africana Studies, the Institute for African and African-American Studies at UCONN. So I'm about to introduce a wonderful lineup of teacher experts at the K-12 level. And we also have in the room education experts at 2 museums. Not everyone from this project could present tonight, but hopefully some of these lessons will be posted in the future. Tom can give you more information about that. But why shade tobacco? In part because it has been one of the most important crops in Connecticut history, and is really the main reason why we have such a vibrant and large and accomplished population of Caribbean Americans here in Connecticut, of Puerto Ricans and Jamaicans in particular, that have had really an indelible impact on Connecticut history. So shade tobacco is a history that's actually understudied, and so it's been a lot of fun to explore this theme together between UCONN, Yale, and a host of museums and schools here in Connecticut. So without further ado, I'd actually like to get us going right into teacher presentations of what they've been thinking, developing, creating for their own classrooms or museum applications. And each teacher will have about 10 minutes to talk. I encourage you to put questions in the Q&A, and then at the end, we'll start addressing those questions, but we want to move through these 7 presentations to make sure everyone has a chance to present on their hard work. So our first speaker has a presentation titled "The Farm on Griffin Road," and that speaker is Tom Rubino, who teaches at the Global Experience Magnet School in Bloomfield, Connecticut. The floor is yours, Tom.
Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? Yes, I'm seeing some nodding. Okay, I'll go with that. So hi, I'm Tom Rubino. Like Anne said, I am a history educator at Global Experience School in Bloomfield. And it's been a real privilege to be able to work with all of these fine people at this project right here. I have been teaching in Bloomfield now for 7 years, and I have a lot of family connections that go way back. So it's a meaningful community to me. And click, he says, optimistically. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the history, and then I'm going to go through my project and the rest of it. So Griffin Road is on the border between Bloomfield and Windsor. It's really actually been well known for being a tobacco country for a long time. And specifically in the beginning of the 20th century, it was owned by a lot of small-time farmers. And this was consolidated in the mid-century under a series of larger cigar companies: American Sumatra Tobacco, Culbro, and General Cigar. Into the 70s and 80s, a lot of this land was sold off to the insurance companies as the popularity of cigars sort of declined. And a lot of the landscape that had been this tobacco farm has become sort of a suburban, urban office commercial park. So in 2005, a particular piece of that land that had been tobacco land was bought by the town of Bloomfield, and it became a little school. So this is a map that my friend Tony Roy shared with me of his map of Bloomfield, where it says right there, you can see on the top. Griffin Road's right there. And then it says, I don't know if you can read it. It's written by hand, but it says originally corn country. Since the early 19th century, tobacco growers occupy most of the plains. So this is the area that I'm talking about in 1950 as an aerial photograph. And you can see from all the way up here, you can see all of the shade tobacco. You can see the rows of I'm drawing a blank on what it's called, of the canopy that was put over it. So you can see which of these fields were definitely being used as tobacco fields at a time. And this is a more recent image. So as you guys can see, a lot of the land has been taken up by larger commercial buildings. And so we got two schools, particularly in this one little block of land. This is they changed the name of it. It used to be called MLC. It's the International Academy. It's a CREC school. And this is Global Experience, my little school right there. So my project is I've been trying to curate a small but useful amount of primary sources to give to my students that are going to help them answer the question, what was life like at the farm on Griffin Road? So I've compiled a bunch of them. First thing I did is I went to the town hall. I found a list of everyone who'd owned the property going back. And I went through the Hartford Courant and other newspaper archives to collect articles about Bloomfield Tobacco in particular, but also about the companies that own the land, Colborough, American Sumatra, and General Cigar. I tried to find any sort of articles that were published about the value of tobacco, as well as anything that talked about the workers themselves, what the working conditions were like, their immigration, and so forth. I've also collected a series of, where is my mouse? Well, can't seem to find it somehow. Somehow I can't find my mouse. I've got a bunch of census pages from this area, which go into some detail and can be given to students to analyze what people's life. It talks all about how much people are working, where they're from, where their parents are from, the languages they speak, who's at home, and all of this is something I'm going to try and have them dig through. And at the bottom here, I've been working on some metadata, right? What I'd like to do, the problem with having a whole census sheet is that it's a real lot of data for students to trawl through. So what I've been trying to work on recently, and I can't find my mouse. What I've been trying to do recently is I've been trying to pull out the information on the tobacco workers that are working in Bloomfield, Windsor, maybe Hartford specifically, and just pull out where they're from, where they were born, and put that into a database that the students can search decade over decade to look at the trends in labor and where people are coming from. All right, so some challenges and some next steps. As this is some place-based learning, I really like to get into some artifacts and material connections, and by that I mean I'd like to see if I can find any evidence around the school with my classes in particular of any of the farm equipment that may have been left there. That would be really interesting to see if we can get the students to look at that and maybe to compare it with the equipment that exists at the Windsor Shade Tobacco Museum. I also want to try and see if I can find some specific oral histories or connections to folks who could be resources on this, for especially Colborough, which was the last tobacco company to own the land. If I could get some access to being able to speak to former tobacco workers, current tobacco workers, and get that into a format that the students would be able to use when they're looking through. I want to try and broaden this a little bit so that it can be applicable to a larger group of students than just the people who go to my school and nearby schools. And I've got, of course, I've got to work on differentiating and scaffolding these texts for a variety of students and abilities. But that is what I'm looking to do in the near future. So that is my plan. That's what I've been working on, and I very much appreciate the support and the I'm really bad at ending these things. I really appreciate the support and the resources that have been provided me by the group, and it's been a really wonderful opportunity. So are we doing questions now, or are we waiting till the end for questions?
Waiting till the end.
I thought you. All right, so I will wrap it up in that case. He says, and now the mouse problem starts to continue. All right.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tom. What a great example of place-based learning. I don't think you can get closer to the place than right in the backyard of the school. It's terrific. Okay, so next we'll have Daniel Merrick give us a presentation about how did tobacco cultivation drive Latin American migration to Connecticut. Dan teaches at Manchester High School, and just I have to let folks know that I know Dan because he teaches Latin American history, so I collaborate with him on Latin American history, and he might win the prize for the most enthusiastic participant we had this semester. This semester, he was very excited to learn more about shade tobacco. So it was really wonderful to see his enthusiasm lighting up the group this fall.
Okay, so let's see if I can share. See how this works. Okay. Sure. And it's not the screen I want. Okay. So can everyone see right now? You should see just a Google Doc.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'm Daniel Merrick. I'm a social studies teacher at Manchester High School. And as Anne said, I teach the ECE Latin American Studies in the spring semester. And I've done that for, I guess, maybe 3 years now at Manchester High. And for tobacco, tobacco is a great vehicle for me because one of my goals in the class that I hadn't done well at all was to find a way to connect kind of local Latino history to the course. In other words, I would assign chapters of textbooks and we would look at kind of migration as a big picture in the United States, but I hadn't done much in terms of connecting it to Connecticut for the students. And that was my goal. And so when tobacco came along, I was like, this is brilliant. And so I was already interested in tobacco because I literally lived less than a mile from a tobacco field where my house is. And I have to add one little quick story in there is that when I was an undergraduate student at UCONN, so this is 1985, 86, I remember in my dorm room at one of my best friends from my dorm at UCONN told me, oh yeah, I picked tobacco in the summer. And I was like, you're crazy. No one picks tobacco in Connecticut. I grew up in Eastern Massachusetts and I didn't believe him. I thought it was a lie. And now I've met other people who actually as a summer job pick tobacco. And so little by little, I've learned about it. And then I learned really from listening to, from our presentations and from Elena about how important it was in driving migration to Connecticut. So I realized that this would be a great, a great way to to talk about how Latin American migration happens right here in Connecticut, especially in this area. My first challenge was just going through the sheer amount of resources that we had. Anne shared so much stuff in there that I spent hours just looking at all of it, deciding what I could use. And I realized that I would have to do at least 3 lessons to kind of do it justice. So a lot of the work I've done has been trying to figure out what those 3 days would sort of look like, what my goals would be, what my essential questions would be. And I kind of decided on essential questions rather than an inquiry unit. That was my first idea, but I realized that wasn't ideal I didn't really have a compelling question because all of my evidence was going to support one side, which was the fact that tobacco was a major driver of immigration to Connecticut. So, so if you take a look at my day one, what I'll be doing is really answering that question. How did tobacco cultivation drive Latin American migration to Connecticut? So what my students would have seen before this class is they would have a homework assignment where they would have read the article by Ruth Glasser, which is a fantastic article, relatively concise, but really informative about Puerto Rican migration farmers in Connecticut. And so I took the article and made it into a doc so I could use it in my class, and I made questions for it. So the students would have read that already and answered the questions as a homework assignment just to prep them for that. And then the first class would look at, I loved the Periscope film that was a half an hour like promotional video about growing tobacco in Connecticut from, I think the 1960s, I think, is the video. So we'd watch that together in the class. We would talk about the homework assignment, the questions on the homework assignment, and if I have time to squeeze this all into 55 minutes, my goal is to create a slideshow with just some background of growing tobacco in Connecticut. And a lot of the information would come right out of the book from that Brianna gave us on our field trip, which was so informative. And so I've just create some background slides for students so they would know a little about that. So if day one is about why are people moving to Connecticut to grow tobacco, to work in tobacco fields, like why are we growing tobacco here and why are people coming here? What's driving this migration? The day 2 assignment would be, or a question would be answering, well, what was it like for the workers here? And what was their experience like? And I thought using oral histories was perfect for that. That's new to me. I've done interviews with students, have students interview people, but I've never used oral history. So I've got some work to do here because I have a couple websites with lots of raw information on that. But I have to kind of curate those and look through. And I think I'm going to ask Fiona for some help in selecting some specific oral histories that I could focus on, because, you know, I can't spend days and days just reading through random ones, you know, or else I'll just lose the interest of the student. So I have to be kind of specific about what, you know, what I want them to see and what I want them to get out of it. You know, that's going to tell us give me the most bang for the buck about what was the experience of the people there. So, so that would be kind of my day 2. And then my day 3 is then how did these people who came, how did these migrants, how did they change Connecticut? How did they influence you know, Hartford and this region? So, and I found from some of the teach it lesson plans, there was some great artifacts, some newspaper articles and things about Puerto Rican Day and, you know, the parade. And so I think we'd look at some artifacts and draw some conclusions on that. I think I would try to use a lot of just maybe photos as well as reading some newspaper articles about, and the one about bilingual education in Hartford and how kind of controversial that was. And that would be my goal there, is to say, how did this change Hartford as a city? And how did that, you know, the people who came, how did they integrate into the society as a whole? So that's kind of what my 3-day plan looks like right now. So I've still got plenty of work to do. As I said, a lot of, I still have to design some activities and design some assessment at the end of that. So I've got a load of work yet to do. So questions, I guess. Did I do that in 10 minutes?
Well, you did great, but we're going to save questions for the end. We're going to try to put questions in the chat, but thanks, Dan. This is really a fabulous layout and a wonderful sort of application of many of the sources that we collectively came up with. This is a lovely way to organize them and really think through how Latin Americans and Caribbean folks have come, stayed, and then contributed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you also remind me that to let the audience know that y'all didn't have that much time to put this together. only a few weeks. So this is wonderful.
Yeah, I have this inconvenient job of teaching full time. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. All right. Let me unshare if I can.
And also, you know, speaking of interviews, Steve Jarmick has a lovely interview at the Library of Congress, I think from 2014, maybe. It's very easy to access and download. And we should probably give a shout out to Jarmick Farms. That was half of our workshop, our field trip. Steve Jarmick is one of 62 tobacco farmers between Connecticut and Massachusetts, but might be the nicest and has always been accommodating to teachers and students. So he's another one that we might even want to get, maybe have students do a more contemporary interview of as well. Yeah, thank you. So our next presentation, actually our next presenter also deserves a special shout out. Rain Michelle Eiffel put together the first half of our field trip Saturday and really did a wonderful job as an expert educator at the Connecticut Valley Tobacco Museum of giving teachers a wonderful opportunity to really look at their exhibits, speak with local experts about the machinery and how tobacco production actually happened. It's an absolutely lovely museum. It was a lovely day, perfect fall afternoon to be there. So highly recommended place to visit with your students. So Rain's presentation is called Enhancing Exhibits at the Connecticut Valley Tobacco Museum. So Rain, the floor is yours.
Hello, good to see or hear from everyone. Good to see and hear from you guys again. It was wonderful working with you all when you visited the museum recently. Had a great experience learning with you all. As someone mentioned Brianna Dunlap earlier in this conversation and previously, it was great to work with her. She is the expert. She wrote the book. She wrote the book that I rely on and I'm still learning. It's great to know her and to be able to introduce her to you all. And so thank you for coming to the museum. And I hope that as you guys continue to develop your different initiatives, that you will remember us. My goal, my project is going to begin officially in the spring of 23. So next year, I'll be going back to the museum in my role as the curator for the Connecticut Valley Tobacco Museum. Right now, the museum is closed for the winter season, but I'm very excited to begin my project, which is to expand the reach and the voice of the Black and Latino, especially farm workers. I'm going to be looking at post-World War II America and the farm labor that was happening here in Connecticut. Of course, you guys know that we have a piece of the largest collection of archival material related to the Connecticut Valley and tobacco industry. Of course, the Windsor Historical Society really has the lion's share, and I've been able to get some resources on loan from the Windsor Historical Society over to the Connecticut Valley Tobacco Museum. So we do have two very important volumes of scrapbooks that were created by Ralph C. Lasbury. And I think that is a very wonderful place to begin as far as me expanding the reach to the public, the general public, to teachers, and to an audience of visitors. So my goal is to expand the reach and to share the narratives that are related again to the Black and Latino worker population and their stories here in Connecticut. This kind of might sound a little weird that I'll be looking at Ralph C. Lasbury as a jumping off point, but he does a very good job collecting articles that relate to those groups. He collects articles about everything related to tobacco, and of course, a very important group of a collection of articles related to the Black and Latino migrant workers or guest workers coming to Connecticut to make this $1 million industry work. And so getting there is one way for me to begin to expand the reach. When I return in the spring to do that job of expanding the reach of our archives and our exhibit, I will be looking at how we can connect to communities in Connecticut, be able to identify where those communities are and promote these initiatives that are for the public to come and share their tobacco stories. So we'll be collecting oral histories as a part of these reunion celebrations that I'm planning for in March when we come back. I would like to start that then, or soon thereafter. But the goal is to have these continuous programming where these former farm workers are able to come to be celebrated, to celebrate, to check out the exhibit, but then also for us to collect their oral histories, and that those oral histories would become a part of our archives going forward. So I mentioned Lasbury, but of course, many of you came to the museum, you saw the exhibition, you see that what we have, you see that we have photographs, we have videos in particular, and also some videos of the housing and also an installation on site that replicates the housing that would have been available to these migrant workers that were coming over post-World War II and beyond. And so we have lots of great firsthand materials and then some replicated materials and lots of fun things and exciting things that are available at the museum. And my goal is to make it accessible, to let the public know that we have these things, not to keep it our little secret, but to broadcast it, not just to Connecticut, but to Connecticut and beyond. I did not press the start button on my timer, so I've just been talking. And I think with that, that'll be enough from me. If you had at the end, I guess I'll answer more questions that you all may have. Thank you so much. And that will be all for me.
Thank you. That was only 4 minutes. If you have anything else you wanted to.
I think I did a good job rushing through everything, but I think I said everything that I wanted to say. I mentioned what we have, the things that you already know. I mentioned the scrapbooks and the reunions, the farm workers or the reunions that we will be having and for public programming. And also someone mentioned Jarma. So I do recorded a few, introduce myself with some of the Jamaican farm workers that were there last. And so I do have a few short clips that I wanted to kind of interject, but that would take me over the 10 minutes for sure. And they're not as polished, but I would like when they return to organize different interviews with those incredible farm workers. And I will be doing this in tandem with Win TV. They have the supplies that we'll be using to do the recordings and also to promote these reunions. So they'll be working with this amazing organization, and also different senior centers here in Connecticut will be that we are affiliated with, and also the Windsor Historical Society. So we've got our team. I've got the team. I've got my eyes set on a few different partners that I'm looking forward to working with in the spring and going forward to promote these reunions and collect these stories, so that our archives could only be greater and broader and more inclusive, and to tell the more full story of the farm worker experience. And that's all.
Wonderful. We can't wait to see what you come up with next spring.
Thank you.
And it sounds like you might need some student interns to also help bring more of this online. We could talk about that. You're on mute.
Yes. Absolutely a strong yes. I did put out a call for interns. I'm not sure of how far it went, but we're definitely looking for interns to help with this process. Thank you.
And maybe high school students as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I understand that there is a requirement for volunteering. I feel like our museum is a perfect place for us to have conversations and to see how that we can make that happen. Yes, high school students, college students. Yes, absolutely.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. So we have another representative of a museum here in Connecticut, another educator, expert, and Jennifer Busa is with us from the Connecticut Historical Society in Hartford, Connecticut, and she is going to be presenting on tobacco, migration, immigration, and community building.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Anne. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, if I can figure that out. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to start by saying that I was so excited to be part of the workshop because at the Connecticut Historical Society, we received an IMLS grant to create these 10 digital resource packs to support the CIRC curriculum. And the plan is for us to use collection items to create these digital resource packs and for them to be available for free for teachers. So I'll talk a little bit about the timeline for that if I have time at the end, but I wanted to jump right into potentially what one of these resource packs might look like. And so it would be a lesson, and I've connected it to the unit and the specific units that it connects to. We include some different standards that it would connect to. And then essentially the lesson is a way for students to look at how migrants and immigrants that came here for tobacco work, came to Connecticut to work in the tobacco farms, really faced discrimination, but at the same time were able to develop community building here in Connecticut. And to do this, they'll be doing a little bit of an analysis of primary and secondary sources. And before I can jump into that, I wanted to really make this sort of a one-stop shop where everything a teacher might need is all in one lesson. So there is a short, very abbreviated history of the Connecticut Valley tobacco. So we start with the background for that. And it's all leading up to this one essential question that is in the unit 4 and 5, which is EQ8, agency and civic engagement. So that's where this all the activities are leading up to. But I talk a little bit about the background of why people came to Connecticut and what that looked like. And then there's a little bit of an introductory activity to kind of get us continuing to think about the farm workers. So I just wanted to share I created a PowerPoint that would be shared with kids. Can everybody see that? I hope.
Yeah, and also
Okay.
when you go back to the Google, there was also a request if you might hit that plus and make it a little bigger, the word. Yeah.
Okay, definitely. So just to make sure all the kids are really on the same page, talking about where workers are coming from, just a little bit of geography added in, looking at where the tobacco valley is, Connecticut Tobacco Valley is, and then jumping into a couple of primary sources and sort of work through sort of a VTS, a visual teaching strategy, in asking students what's going on, what do you see that makes you say that, what more can we find, and then giving them some of the information about what they're looking at, that this is a photograph, it's from a scrapbook from one of the tobacco companies, the farmer, LB Haas and Company. And so that is something from our collection, and everything for this digital resource pack that we're trying to create is really mainly focused on items from our collection, but not exclusively. And then if there's time, the teacher can go on to one more. This is a postcard. So this is the front and the back. And again, asking those questions to get students thinking about what it was like to be a tobacco worker. And then let me see if I can get back to my lesson. Can't see my screen. Here we go. Let's see if I can blow this up a little bit. All right. Is that a little bit better? Or
I
Still seeing the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I still see your slides.
oh, okay. So I'm gonna just do. Here we go. Sorry about that. Can you see my lesson again?
Yes.
All right. See if I can zoom in a little bit. How's that?
Better.
All right. So then after the introduction, there's an activity, and this is again to lead up to the answering of the essential question. So the students would be divided into groups, and each group would get a source pack that contains 3 sources, and they're a combination of primary and secondary sources. And while they're with their group exploring and examining each source, they're completing a graphic organizer, which I wanted to click on just so you'd see what they're doing as they're looking at the sources. Can everybody see the graphic organizer? Okay, so they would look at what type of source is it? Is it a primary or secondary? What actually is it? Is it a newspaper article, an image, and so on? And then start writing down examples of discrimination that might be discussed in or visible in this source, and then write down examples of ways that immigrants and migrants were taking steps to make change in the communities. And then, of course, it would not be complete if they weren't actually evaluating the source to say if it was a useful and reliable source, if there's any biases in it or things like that. Can you get, let's see, I'll get back to my lesson plan here. So that's something that they will fill out an organizer for each source that they look at in their group. And then we'll come back to a whole group discussion and kind of share out, so they're seeing what kinds of sources other groups looked at. Of course, in just 1 or 2 class periods, it's hard for students to really get a chance to look at that many primary and secondary sources. Is just a time constraint. So by sharing out, they would get a chance to really see what other kids looked at. And then, of course, the next activity would just be answer the question at using their graphic organizers, maybe write a little paragraph about that. Of course, teachers can expand that if they wanted to and make it into a larger assignment. This is just sort of a guideline. And then for the last activity, it's taking it the next step. So using what they learned from these sources and thinking, reflecting about, well, what kinds of problems did migrants and immigrants face when they came to Connecticut? What were the solutions to the problems that they faced? Are those solutions still something that we could use today for a pressing issue? And then with a partner to think about, well, what is a pressing issue today? And how would you go about solving that problem and taking action? And to do that, I created kind of a 5 W's organizer: who, what, where, when, why, all for them to kind of think about how would they take action, and to put that into creating a social media post about what would an event look like if you were organizing it, who is the audience, what is going to happen at this event, is it a rally, is it a petition signing, something like that. And then they would share their media posts. But I did want to share what one of these source packets would look like. I've created 3. I will say that there's more work to do on that front. It takes quite a bit, as you can imagine, to pull together sources. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can find my digital resource pack, or excuse me, one of my, let's see, hang on 1 second, I'm just going to pull it up. Just I think I have another minute or 2, Anne.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have 3 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here is an example, because everybody see this is one of the packs. Again, I'm trying to use a combination of primary and secondary sources, most of which from our collection, but not all. So here we have is a program booklet from the Taste of the Caribbean and Jerk Festival from 2013. So it's an image, and again, I'm trying to get students in a group, fill out their graphic organizer and really think about what is this image all about and try to piece things together. And then I did give a little background because I know this might be totally foreign source for them, and I think it's important to kind of give some hints as to what they're looking at. So background on what the festival is all about. The second source I came up with, I found this really great article. It's from 1945, and it's talking about Jamaicans, those that came here to work in the fields, the tobacco fields, and then having access to education and wanting to stay. And then the last source for this one is I did include, we hosted Elena actually for a lunch and learn where she talked about, the title was The Social and Cultural Expressions of Puerto Rican Settlement in Post-War Hartford, and she talked a lot about the Puerto Rican Day Parade. So I selected a couple of clips from her presentation that kids can kind of hone in on. I know there's just time constraints to watch the whole thing is difficult, but then they can kind of get an idea of what the Puerto Rican Day Parade was all about, where its roots came from. And then let's see if I can share. I want to share just one more if that's possible. Can everybody see this one? Let's see. There we go. Again, here's a program from Puerto Rican Day Parade from 1992. So each group, I'm trying to give a combination of types of sources, maybe a video, maybe a program, so something from our collection. For some of them, I was able to incorporate an oral history interview. Nuestras Historias, I know that we were talking about oral history interviews quite a bit, and we have a really great collection called Nuestras Historias. We also have a collection of West Indian Community Historian Project that Fiona spearheaded. So we have a lot of oral history projects if anyone is looking for interviews. So I really had to pare it down though. They're very long and dense. So I did include some vocabulary, interviewee, interviewer, transcription, just so kids would get everyone's up to speed. And then I created a little bit of a background and then kind of cut up the interview into just some pieces. You'll see that it's still several pages long, but usually talking about someone they might know that worked in the tobacco farms, what it was like living in Hartford, maybe some challenges they faced. So all getting at that, what maybe discrimination they faced and what were some community action that was taken to move forward. And then this one, I was able to include a photo of a housing protest that was in Hartford in the 60s. So again, something else I was able to include from our collection. So I did put together 3 of those packets. I wanted to just at least show you a couple of them. I'd like to create a couple more. Ultimately, as I mentioned, these digital resource packs would include a lesson with the primary sources from our collection, perhaps a video as well, and they would be available for free for teachers to support them as they're working through the CIRC curriculum. Our timeline for this project is we're creating the digital resource packs now. We have a teacher advisory board that will try these out and give us a bunch of great feedback by the end of this school year. And then for next school year, 23-24, we're looking for 20 teachers to pilot these 10 DRPs, digital resource packs. So if anyone out there is a teacher, would like to be a pilot, I'm going to plug that please get in touch with me. We would love to have you try these out so we can see how they're working and edit them down to make them manageable. So that's the very fast version. Sorry, I'm talking so fast.
What a wonderful project. This is so well organized and so creative. This is going to be a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah, I have to say I'm really excited about it. I am working behind the scenes doing a lot of the collection piece of it, but we have hired a curriculum specialist, Nina Vasquez, and she's amazing, and she's put together some DRPs that are wonderful. I was able to do this one, so I'm hoping that we can use this one, maybe modify it a little bit. It might look a little different when it's on our website, but really excited about the program for sure.
Terrific. Thank you very much. You've been busy. Okay, our next presentation is by Tracy Agello, who is an elementary school teacher at the Doolittle School in Cheshire Public Schools in Cheshire, and her presentation is called Integrating the Study of Shade Tobacco and Agriculture into the Elementary Art, Science, and Social Studies curriculum. Woo! A lot.
Hi. So the thing is with like a topic like shade tobacco isn't actually in the elementary curriculum. So what I try to do with the kids is to find ways to add more experiences like that I have, workshops that I go to, and use that as the examples. For example, we have to do in grade 3 landscapes. So I put together like a packet for the kids to teach them to give examples and primary source documents. And then I always send that to parents. So we have Parent Square or whatever your email system is. So that way parents see all the examples too. So Tom, if you could look at the next slide. And then just if you click down at the blue. Oh, go back. All right, so go to the next slide and then click on the blue links at the bottom there, because then you'll see the lesson, hopefully. Whoop. It's not up there yet. But what it is that not working, Tom?
I'm seeing it on my end, but are you just saying the original?
Yeah, it's just showing the grade 3 landscape,
Right.
not showing the part that's.
Let's see.
Because it should.
It's not coming up, huh?
No.
Oh,
Tom, I think you have to stop sharing your screen and then reshare it with the new window.
oh, okay.
Tom's acting as my tech support.
Lucky you.
There it is. So what I do with the kids is I always give them primary source documents, whether it be a photo or a video, in this case, landscapes. And I teach in Cheshire. So we start with John Frederick Kensett because he has a huge Cheshire, Connecticut connection. And then you'll see that I put the standards for the visual arts in it. And then after going through this project, I added landscapes that are, tobacco based. There's some photos that came from this project. I don't remember which one of you guys put them. And then I did a search for ones, especially in Connecticut. And it was really, I just did this with the kids the other day. And it was so funny because having taught this exact same thing last year, they were way more excited this year because they're like, oh my gosh, tobacco, Mrs. Agello, smoking? And then I'm like, oh no, tobacco was, you know, that was it's a big crop in Connecticut, and they didn't know. And I go, just like in the South, you know, people picked cotton, like, and they were like so excited to learn. And what I always try to do is give them enough on their own that gets them started, and then have them research, and then they'll find something else. And in third grade, they just have to know foreground, background, middle ground, horizon line. So it doesn't really matter what the subject is that you give them. So I was able to infuse tobacco into it, and everything that we do in the visual arts, just like what you do as an elementary classroom teacher in social studies, every document, they're looking for what story that document tells about the culture of the people, the history, the time period, what kind of life they were, the socioeconomic status. So this project, and it was really cool because then I was telling the kids that we went and we didn't get to pick tobacco, but we, you know, pulled it off I forget what it was called, but it was cool for them to know that we teachers have experiences and are always learning too. All right, and then the second one, so go to the next, Tom. No, Tom's might be on a white. The next one is in 6th grade, you have to do perspective drawing. So same idea, I just added pictures that I found throughout this project about tobacco farms with perspective. Because once again, you can infuse anything. Elementary kids can learn about hard topics, but you just do it at their level just by exposing them to other ideas. I haven't taught this one yet because I do perspective later in the year with 6th grade, but I've been starting to search for photos and paintings, and then the kids will search for more. So it will get richer as they discover more things. And it's having them look at what stories it tells about the culture of whoever was working there, what kind of life they lead. And like me, from going through the project, I can do a much better job about that because we went to the barracks on Jamoke farms and really looked at the people. I would be claustrophobic, like I was telling the kids, I would be claustrophobic living in those barracks. And you see what sacrifices people make coming to a different country to work and to provide for their families. All right, and the last one is Simple Machines. And Simple Machines is a unit that we do in 5th grade in science. I taught science forever. And so the only adjustment to make to add about tobacco to this one is I just searched for examples of tools that we saw when we went on at the museum and then at the farm too. And have the kids look for, there's a million options here. And that's another thing, just teaching elementary school, you want to provide kids many ways to show that they have mastered the curriculum content. In Simple Machines, you know, they need to know how simple machines are developed to make work easier, faster, cheaper. And then, so I gave them a million options of how to show that knowledge, like choose a tool from the Connecticut Tobacco Museum, draw a diagram, build a 3D model of the machine using recycled materials, draw a diagram or create a 3D model, show how you would improve the machine. So once again, looking at what is currently available and then how to make it better, right from the point of view of a Connecticut tobacco farmer. The kids would do a much better job because I experienced that. So I'd be able to show them things that I learned. So that's why it's so good for teachers to participate in programs like this, because the more you know, the better job you're going to do. Like years ago, I went to the Henry Ford Museum. I wrote a Model T. So like I'm better at teaching kids how to infuse simple machines. So I would just add this experience into just providing them more options. And there's so many, you know, there's so many LA connections, language arts connections too. But that's it.
Thank you, Tracy. This is such a wonderful example of how hands-on learning for teachers leads to hands-on learning for kids.
Exactly.
Like, you've done such a lovely job in translating a lot of the work down to 3rd to 6th grade levels.
Thank you.
You sound like a really fun teacher.
I love teaching. It is fun, you know.
It shows. Wonderful. Okay, so only 2 more presentations. And the next presentation is by Dr. Tisha Hooks, who is research faculty at Hopkins School in New Haven. And in her spare time, she also is an advisor for the National Humanities Center. Her presentation is called All American Agriculture, Imperialism, Total Warfare, and the World War II Homefront. Welcome, Dr. Hooks.
You're muted.
Hi, everyone. You know, I'm having a little, let's see. Hi. Can you see this?
Not yet. We still see we still
face?
see you. We see your lovely face. Yeah.
Okay. Let's try this again. This will be interesting. Let's see.
You can possibly send it to Tom.
I may indeed have to do that. What I'm seeing are a bunch of
see-
exclamation points.
You see a share screen button on
I
your,
see a share screen and I click on it, and what I'm seeing is a bunch of
if you want to email it to me, I will
do
be
so.
standing by.
My apologies, everyone. Okay. Well, if you wanted to move on to the next person and I could come back, would that be better? So if folks aren't holding on.
Tom, have you seen it in your inbox yet?
No, it hasn't shown up in my inbox.
Okay.
It's on its way, hopefully.
Ruth,
Okay.
Terry, are you okay with presenting now?
Let's see.
We can. I'm with Miss Walden and Lily, if that's
Or if there are questions, I'm happy to answer.
Tish, I'll talk to you offline and we can get yours going after Ruth and her team has done theirs.
Okay.
Okay, we'll see you.
Okay, so we'll be back shortly with Tisha's presentation, but in the meantime, we will move on to a team from Westville High School. And that team consists of former attorney, current anti-racist educator, Ruth Terry Walden, her co-curricular creators, Lily Hardman and Kayla Williamson, star students at Westville High School. And they are going to be presenting on discovering Black female collective agency in the Connecticut tobacco farms of Hartford County. So welcome to the 3 of you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Lily, I think you're going to share your screen.
Yes, do I have permission or like availability? Like, am I able to share my screen on there? Does anybody need to switch permission to me?
You should be able to press there should be a green share screen button at the bottom. You should be able to share it doing that. And Tish, you might want to stop your video until we're ready to go.
Thank you.
Okay, let me try that right now.
Okay.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we can see. You just have to go to your slides. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Uh-oh, I want to be able to see my speaker notes. Okay, so our project was on the student perspective of discovering Black female collective agency in the Connecticut tobacco farm of Hartford County. And our project was by me, Lily Hardman, Kayla Williamson, and Miss Walden. So a little bit of background info. What is the economic importance of tobacco farming in the Connecticut economy? And so Connecticut tobacco is globally prized for its superiority in wrapping cigars. And while there are over 50 varieties of tobacco wrappers and leaves, there are 4 primary varieties: Connecticut, Corojo, Habanero, and Maduro. Sorry, I don't have that much info that I can pronounce it perfectly yet. The only significant tobacco export in America comes from Connecticut. And tobacco is a leading agricultural export of the state. And that was from the New York Times in 2007. And in 2007, it was worth $30 million. And now today it has doubled to a whopping $60 million. The introduction of such a labor-intensive crop to Connecticut's economy drew migrant labor from the South and the Caribbean. So as a student, what educational skills do we learn from taking this deeper dive? So the complexity of the text, this allows us to familiarize ourselves with the use of primary source documents to support our understanding of civic engagement. Through evidence, primary source documents demonstrate factual evidence to support the space and time component of community engagement to be discussed and analyzed. And through close examination of the documents, we begin to understand the context and construction environments, example setting in which individual advocacy and agency occurs. And through knowledge, by utilizing shifts 1 and 2, the students are exposed to texts that convey a depth of meaning that provides social commentary, individual advocacy, and a demonstration of personal and collective agency through coalition groups. So this is Tim Martin, the department head of AgriScience West Hill, and I wanted to share a video that we got earlier in the week just with him talking about agriculture and tobacco. I want to make sure everyone can hear this.
I'm here with Tim Martin. He's part of the Ag Science program here at West Hill, and he's an avid educator interested in farming. My question to you, Martin, is, do you know what shade tobacco farming is?
I don't know.
Do you know anything about shade tobacco farming in Connecticut?
Nothing.
What would you say if I said to you that shade tobacco is the #1 agricultural export of the state?
I know
This time, no more registration. Registration would resume on Monday. Monday, December 19th. At this time, the council offices closed. Registration would resume on Monday, 12/19.
And that created the Hartford community that we know today?
I had no idea. I've heard that it's shrinking, that you're tear down some of the old drying barns, so a lot of people trying to preserve them. Is that true?
It is true. There is a Shea Tobacco and Tobacco Museum in Hartford County, but there's over 3,000 acres of shea tobacco that's still cultivated here in Connecticut, and it has an estimated economic value, export value, $60 billion.
Awesome. Awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd like to do it.
You would?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome, fantastic. You're interested now in
100%. Yeah.
shea tobacco.
Any Connecticut agricultural enterprise, I mean, that's what we teach here.
Fantastic. Let's see if we can get a picture.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, why is this video important? I am sure that this was not the response that was anticipated or expected from the department head of agri-science in a Connecticut school with over 3,000 kids, especially judging that if Connecticut does hold $60 million worth of exports in tobacco, the fact that he's not familiar with this is mind-blowing to me. So as a 17-year-old, I had no idea that shea tobacco, obviously before this project, was even processed in Connecticut still, let alone the #1 agricultural export of the state. However, the fact that in the agri-science department, a department centered around farming, they have little to no knowledge about a crop that has extensive ramifications on communities of color is far more interesting. What's also interesting about this is that upon hearing that there is a rich history, he agrees that he would love for the department to take a trip up to Hartford, signifying that the interest is there, but our public schools have previously lacked the knowledge to act on it. So without understanding tobacco, it is nearly impossible to understand the Black female collective agency in the Connecticut tobacco farms of Hartford County. And so now we just get a little bit more into that. So the creation of Black female agency in Hartford County, and Mary Townsend Seymour was an early Black activist in the Niagara movement with W.E.B. Du Bois. She was a member of the Hartford Black middle class, as both she and her husband were gainfully employed, civil and federal servants, and she was known as a Hartford community activist through her recruitment efforts of the emerging National Association of Colored People. And I think Kayla's going to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Lily. So, as Lily said, Seymour was a very influential figure in tobacco and history and all that. But now I'm really going to talk about the Hartford County and how it was a haven for Southern violence. So, due to continuing violence as a result of Black agency in Southern states, as well as a shifting workforce, Northern employers began recruiting Southern Black people to work in the North. So by shifting workforce, I mean that white women were leaving Hartford County tobacco fields to work in munitions factories post-World War I. These Black women, they're the second decade of the Great Migration from 1910 to around like 1970, when 6 million Blacks left the South for the North, Western North, and Midwestern regions for sanctuary and survival. So we have, throughout like the course of our presentation, we have one of our primary sources was the crisis, and the editor was Du Bois. So if you can see on the slide to the top right, it says, it was among the women in the tobacco factories or warehouses that Hartford's most interesting work was done. White women in great numbers left the tobacco industry to get more money at munitions works, and their places were filled by colored women from the South, many of whom were educated, uneducated, and wholly unfamiliar with their new conditions. That these colored workers were being defrauded of their just wage was soon evident from their stories. So, as you can see, Black women from the South, they comprised the majority of jobs in the tobacco farms and were quickly exploited by farming establishments. So they were paid subpar wages. They were kind of tricked by tobacco foremen by weighing tobacco dry, which I'll show you later, instead of wet. So basically, tobacco is supposed to be, when it's weighed, like for processing and getting your like yield from it, it should be wet instead of dry, because like the dry leaves are not very heavy, so you don't get a lot of money from that. But the foreman actually like tricked the Black workers into weighing the tobacco leaves dry, so they were getting very unequal wages, and they took advantage of their inability to read. And those who protested, the Black women who protested at the tobacco factories, they were forced to leave. So in that second excerpt that you see in the like bottom right-ish, it says there's no regularity, oh, there was no regularity regarding payment. Payment was made in such a fashion that no one could tell how much she made a week. One woman, a widow of a soldier with 4 children, made $3.90, and another $1.62, another as low as 40 cents. They were worked irregularly and cheated in many little ways. The weighing was often unfair, the foreman taking advantage of the fact that most of his employees could not read the scales. Like I said, saying that inability to read, they took advantage of that. And at the bottom, it says, then again, the tobacco would be weighed dry when the proper price was for tobacco weighed wet. And then lastly, you can see Mrs. Seymour, as Lily mentioned above, she was an activist that came and really, she went undercover and in these tobacco fields and really acted as a source of civic engagement for these Black laborers. So I'll touch on that in the next slide. So Black expose of working conditions publicized in the crisis. So like I said, the crisis is the primary source that we use. You can see the cover magazine image to the very far right, and then another excerpt that I'll mention briefly in this slide. So Mary Townsend Seymour, she goes undercover as a tobacco farm worker to verify the Black women's complaints of maltreatment, which I was describing above, about unfair wages and being taken advantage of. So she then writes and publishes her experiences in The Crisis, which is the national magazine of the newly founded NAACP at the time. She gains recognition for this work. And really, the impact of Seymour was it led to a unification of the workers. You see community and Black female empowerment as well as civic engagement. So in that little excerpt that I have here, it says, but to understand exactly their conditions, Miss Mary Townsend Seymour, vice president of the branch of the NAACP, she donned herself in working clothes and entered the factory for a time worked and for a time worked at tobacco stripping and stemming. The stories that had been brought to her by the women she found were all too true. So she basically verified and confirmed their maltreatment. And she published her experiences in The Crisis magazine. So in the next slide, it says creating a coalition of women laborers. So as a result of her findings, as well as the Black women in the field speaking out in community forums such as Black Church. So I have an image featured here, which is one of the kind of spotlight churches in Hartford. It's called the Talcott, or now like Faith Congregational Church, as well as a local chapter of NAACP meetings. The laborers decided to form a collective bargaining unit to basically protect their labor rights. So Mary Townsend Seymour, she creates the first tobacco workers union in Hartford County that is diverse with respect to race and gender. It lasts a year. Seymour also gains a chair at the Central Union Labor Committee of Hartford, comprised of a group of labor unions in the Hartford area. So by having a seat on the central committee, she keeps the plight of these Black women, female tobacco workers front and center amongst all the other unions. And she recruited a lot of white people actually to join the NAACP, and they did. And thus she pioneered efforts to improve working conditions for tobacco workers. So some key takeaways here on the last slide, just some things that we learned, some things that hopefully, if this would be implemented in a school curriculum, that hopefully the students would learn, is that empowerment through civic engagement comes from the least likely places. So Seymour was undercover. Nobody knew who she was. They didn't know that she was well educated, but she really had a very strong impact on tobacco workers in Hartford. So as we discovered through our research, marginalized groups will always find a way to affect positive community and social change. You see them collecting together to really make a difference in the really tough situations. So never underestimate the power of collective voices, coalition building, and community cornerstones such as Black Church and grassroots organizations such as the Niagara Movement and the NAACP. And really, we never thought that looking at shade tobacco farming could teach us about Black historical actors right here in Connecticut, let alone Hartford County, but it did. So Lily and I were really, really grateful to have this experience and to go on the field trip and learn all about the different resources that are available here in Connecticut. And I hope this this session and future ones really start conversations in the classroom to really broaden students' perspectives, especially in Connecticut. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. This is a really fascinating research project. I would love to see this shared with teachers across the state. I look forward to you putting it into a format that you can share it. This is just terrific.
Just so you know, how this morphed into the PowerPoint presentation. Working with both Kayla and Lily, we kept trying to find the appropriate gateway. Where do we want to go, et cetera, et cetera. How do we want to, actually broach and attack this? And we took a deep dive, and it just so happened that in looking at one of the primary source documents, we came across this this reference to Mary Townsend Seymour posting something in a June 1920 Crisis magazine about Black women in the in the Hartford, Connecticut tobacco fields. So we went on a scavenger hunt, and we actually found the actual expose, and it's literally it's a quite vivid account of what happens with Black female agency in Hartford County, particularly among uneducated Southern Black women who are in the fields. And they somehow go to Black church, and they, through their church talking and sharing their experiences with Mary Townsend Seymour, she invites them to an NAACP local chapter meeting. And it's from that meeting that it's determined that she's going to herself go into the fields to verify what they've said. Now, there are lots of inferences there. And so I'm sure that there are other primary source documents available. And so in terms of takeaways, further research, of course, is what happens to this collective bargaining unit that lasts for a year. What are the documents? Where can we find those documents? But also her records, her diary on what happens while she's in these tobacco fields, and why she feels very strongly that they need to organize, they need to come together, do coalition work with other labor groups, and why she feels these women need to protect themselves in these tobacco fields.
This is just fascinating detective work. This is like the one of the most beautiful detective history stories I've heard in a long time. Great work. Great work.
I think the credit needs to go to Kayla and Lily. They did the lion's share of the heavy lifting here, as you can see. And so this is also a project-based assessment. And so, it's not about me, but it's about what the students take away from it. And, every single gateway that we looked at, they were just like, wow, wow, wow. And so I kept asking, so what way, where should we end up? Where should we land? And they both said, of course, there are 3 Black women here, Black female empowerment. And so that was how we were able to put the PowerPoint together. So they came up with a project base. They came up with, what they were going to say and how they were going to do it. This is really, this is really their project. So kudos needs to go to both of them.
Beautiful.
Don't let her fool you. She also put in a ton.
Yeah, she gives us too much credit.
those documents, looking through 90 pages of different primary sources to find the one couldn't have happened without Miss Waldron. And I appreciate that.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies, for a great presentation. And we have one more. And our apologies for now approaching the 8 o'clock mark. But if you will entertain 10 more minutes with us, we would love to share Dr. Tisha Hooks' presentation with you, All American Agriculture, Imperialism, Total Warfare, and the World War II Home Front.
And I assume you can see
We
the.
can.
You can?
Thank you.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Tom. And thank you. Oh my goodness. Following that, I don't think so. That was amazing. What wonderful, wonderful work. Fabulous research. You guys are off to an amazing start, but also fabulous teaching, right? That was really wonderful. Kudos. Congratulations. Okay. So, let's talk about the home front. Let's talk about the 1940s. We could actually move to the next slide. Thank you again, Tom. I really appreciate your shepherding us through this. Perfect. So I just wanted to say a little bit about why the project is what it is and its scope. So I imagine this project as being part of our 10th grade curriculum, which ranges from 1750 to 1945. It looks at, it's called Atlantic communities, and we really are based in the Atlantic world at the moment. But obviously, as we move further into the 19th century and then into the 20th century, for out of necessity's sake, our expansion, we expand and start to include in our discussions, particularly about imperialism, you know, the larger world. But when students come upon this project, as I imagine it, they will be already familiar with the transatlantic slave trade, with the opening of Japan, and you'll see why that is important, with the Roosevelt corollary, and also with this new imperialism of the 19th century that is helping to foment the conditions for World War I. Next slide, please. So my question, I wish we could all, I could hear you. My question for you here is, where is the U.S. home front, right, in the middle of the war? Where would you locate that? And that would be the question that I might begin with as we move into the unit, which is our last unit on World War II. And our next slide. So in that discussion of World War II, and we would build on a discussion we'd already had with World War I, which is this concept of total warfare, right? The mobilization of the home front in service to the battlefront, and really looking at the ways in which government assumes a much more control in terms of the economy, in terms of the way that everyone lives their everyday lives. So total warfare is sort of key here. And again, in thinking about that relationship between the home front and the battlefront. Next slide. When we talk about total warfare, as you saw from that image of Rosie the Riveter, and the image is chosen very deliberately, we're often talking about, of course, factories and not farms. And the next slide. We're talking about gardens, as in Victory Gardens, and not about large-scale growers. Next slide. And this is also very important. So FDR, in the midst of the war, or in the early stages of the war, calls the first farm mobilization day in 1943. So it's not so early. And he says, food is a weapon in total war, fully as important in its way as guns or planes or tanks. So are other products of the farm. The long staple cotton that goes into parachutes, for example, the oils that go into paints for the ships and planes and guns, the grains that go into alcohol to make explosives, also are weapons. Next slide. So he called that farm mobilization day because they had record crops, bumper crop in 1942, and they needed to do the same, if not more so, in 1943 with less labor. And so there is this mobilization, and we have increasingly people are talking about the Women's Land Army, but high school students and college students were also called in, migrant workers from the South, as as has been so beautifully detailed, there's a longer history that's at play here, not just in the 40s. So as we heard in our previous presentation, and later we're going to see Mexican labor, and very importantly, Mexican American labor who was forced out during the Depression, whether or not you were a U.S. citizen, and then come back in through the Bracero program. We have incarcerated labor, as in prison system, soldiers with war injuries, conscientious objectors, German POWs, and vacationers, folks who were encouraged to take a vacation in rural areas and help pick crops, help bring in the harvest. And just in looking at the relationship between labor, all of these different constituencies in terms of our labor pool in this particular moment, I think is right. It's such interesting discussions that one might have, right? And so here we're going to just look at two. Next slide, please. So in Brianna Dunlap's book, thank you so much for sharing that with us. There is this discussion about what happens in the 1940s. In 1941, you get the establishment of the Connecticut Valley Shade Tobacco Growers Association, and the negotiation as we move further into the war with the U.S. and with West Indian governments to recruit workers to harvest tobacco, right, that are coming from Jamaica specifically. And we see this link, and that sort of, you saw earlier in the map that sort of opened this presentation, the links, these connections that are really powerful, right? You get the movement of people, you get the movement of ideas, you get conflict, you get sort of new technologies, all kinds of things that are happening, right? So that relationship between the Caribbean and Connecticut was something I had not thought of or not heard of before, and I was really fascinated by that. And even though getting to Connecticut was a miserable experience in some cases, in many cases, and also the conditions when they arrived here were not great, right? That commitment to the war effort was there, and I think is a really important story to tell and to sort of be thinking about as we hopefully place Connecticut in not only thinking about it on the home front, but also in a kind of global context as well in this period. Next slide, please. Then what I wanted to also add to the discussion, which I think is really interesting and sort of a larger questions that you'll see will follow that I'm also interested in, is what is also happening with the stripping away of rights of Japanese Americans through internment. And obviously in 1942, we know the Executive Order 9066 established these internment camps, forced relocation of individuals into these camps, right, who had been citizens or who had lived here for years and years and years, but of course were not allowed to become citizens. So that relationship is sort of key. I had known about it before, and I thought it would be a nice and really powerful pairing to sort of think about, because as we move later on into the war and the need for labor with regard to agriculture becomes so great, of course, many folks who had of Japanese descent had been farmers and farm workers themselves, and so and had owned significant amount of property. They are asked, encouraged, and treated and the like to come and work for some farms both in the Midwest and also at Seabrook, which is in New Jersey, and which is probably familiar because they had a contract with General Food, and they were sort of connected with they were the Bird's Eye brand. They were doing all that sort of canning and dehydrating and freezing of food. Thank you. And so the questions at the heart of this is, what is home and the home of the home front? in a total war, and what or where are its boundaries and who are its constituents? The next slide. So this is divided into a couple of pieces. The first is a visual piece, and again, there is a graphic organizer to sort of make your way through these images. And then along with that, there are some questions that one can ask, right? So what do the images suggest about the role of agriculture? What are the posters themselves targeting in that first moment? Who isn't here? In those posters, do they point to any issues about farm labor during World War II? And when mobilizing for war, where would you rank agriculture as a priority? And how do the photos affect how we read the posters, right? So the relationship between the two. And what do you want to know more about? And part two, as students start to think about agriculture and they start to think about who's doing what and why and what's going on in that war, we move on to part two, which is a simulation. And in the simulation, basically students are asked to sort of recognize what the need is. We'll talk a little bit about, tobacco and how people are using it during the war and how it appears in various forms in K rations, but also is, cigars themselves are the sort of rate of smoking rises in this period. We'll talk about the need for more crops, et cetera. And then if we move on to the next slide, you'll see that the students are part of a coalition. There will be government administrators, worker representatives, and farmers, right? And they will come together representing Jamaican guest workers and Japanese Americans incarcerated in camps, and they are going to try and reach an agreement. And if they can reach an agreement as to what their working conditions will be in terms of board and pay and medical support, right, then if they can reach that agreement, that's great. Then they will sort of strategize, they'll write it out, and they'll also create a kind of poster that sort of sells this agreement in some way to the home front, right? Like sort of like featuring the home front, and they have to decide what that is. And if they don't come to an agreement, then they have to explain why that is to their constituencies. So if the Farm Security Administration, you've got to write to your superiors in the government. Farmers have to write to their associations, et cetera. And the hope is that they'll have a really fruitful conversation about this. And then when we come back to we'll come back to the question of what is a home front, and who actually constitutes, who are the citizens of it, right? Who lives there, who constitutes it. And that's it. Thank you.
So very cool. The simulation is great. It's also wonderful how you brought different groups together. Like you're helping students really think about everyone from Japanese Americans to Mexican Americans to Caribbean Americans to folks who grew up here. Like it's just wonderful how wide-ranging this lesson is.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are past time, but I'd first like to acknowledge all the folks that presented today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your ideas and your creativity with others, with us. I want to thank the attendees for coming, and I want to invite folks who have attended and have burning questions to stick around. And also, if you need to drop off, if you'd like to follow up by email, that's wonderful too. My email is anne.gebelein@uconn.edu. A lot of us you could find relatively easily on UConn websites, and then we can give you other folks' emails. So other thoughts, Fiona or Tom, about moving forward, or?
Well, we do have one question from Michelle Zaks, who addresses it to Rain and asks if the museum has archives with names of individual people worked in the farms. Is there any way, and I think she's speaking out of from her own family. I think her grandmother worked in a tobacco farm. So is there, you, Rain, or any of you know of any way to maybe track down a friend or a relative who had worked in the tobacco industry?
So I can't think of any way in particular, but I will have to reach out to Brianna and Jim and also Dwayne. They've been there much longer than they may have more insight that I'm not fully aware of at this time. I did look for the farm workers' cards just to see if we could have any record of from the Jamaican and Puerto Rican perspective, but we don't have any in our archives. That is so we do have some from earlier Lithuanians. We have a large collection of those farm workers, but we do not have the same kind of tracking, record keeping for Jamaican and Puerto Rican farm workers, unfortunately. But I can do some research to dig a little deeper, if not between Brianna, Dwayne, and Jim. I can also look at, there is a historian named Sandra Tate Eady. We've had conversation about records that she may have as far as oral histories from farm workers from the West Indies. I'm assuming that this person you were asking is from a West Indian or Puerto Rican background. Am I correct about that?
No, it's someone whose grandmother was from Central Europe and had briefly. So.
Okay. So then probably then yes. I'm so sorry. I was going in the wrong part of the world. So Lithuanians, and earlier we do have a pretty large collection of work cards from that part of the world in that period of time. So actually, yes, I would love to meet with you and look at the archives and see exactly which one of the boxes of worker cards you might be able to find your family members in. So yes.
When will the Connecticut Valley Tobacco Museum reopen?
So we officially reopen the first week in March, but I'm still around. I'm still here in Connecticut in Windsor Locks, and I'm eager and willing to make appointments, arrangements to go in between now and then if there is interest.
Thanks a lot.
So go ahead and send me, if you don't mind sending me an email to my email address, imaginewithifil@gmail.com.
I'll direct Michelle, who is our associate director, to get in touch with you. I'm sure she'd love to visit. And I will say to those of you who are still out there, it's a little gem. That's not a part of the state that I've spent much time in, and it's a great museum. It's got lots of sources, and with Rain there, I think it's going to be doing big things coming up, and it's great. In fact, part of the reason for this project that's been so nice is not just making teachers and students, of course, aware of it, but also, inviting like Rain and Jennifer from Connecticut's Historical Society is really, creating a kind of cross-fertilization of kind of agencies and people and ideas and sharing those. By way maybe of wrapping up, if we don't have any other questions, I'll say too that this is recorded. It will be online probably within a few days. As part of this project, we have a couple of projects that are coming up, one on eugenics that Dan Husang from Yale University is going to be leading with two other instructors who have done a lot of work on the subject. That's going to be starting January 19th. And then in April, we're doing one which is near and dear to me. It's on the Great Migration. What we tend to think of is that kind of movement of African Americans from the South to Chicago and Detroit and all that, but really with a focus, first of all, on Connecticut and how that movement of African Americans kind of remade cities like Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, but also that during that same period, the movement of Puerto Ricans and other people also into Connecticut, and really trying to think about, how those great movements during the years after World War II, that whole period up until the 60s, really 70s, how it really has transformed and shaped the culture of this state. I think it's a great way. It's something all teachers are going to be teaching, the story of the Great Migration. So why not make it a local story as well as a national story?
Tom, are the materials that teachers created going to be available to the general public? And if so, how would they access it?
Yes, they're going to be available on the website, which I can quickly post to you. Those of you who are online, or maybe for those of you who are catching it later, it's at www.blhp.yale.edu.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be posting information about that as well in the Black and Latino History Project newsletter, the GLC newsletter, and elsewhere about. I should also say that El Instituto at UCONN has been a great help in helping to promote, and also a lot of intellectual capital in the form of Anne and all of you who work with El Instituto, as well as with the Shade Tobacco Collective. And also I want to do a shout out to the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective, who've been great help in promoting and in introducing us to some great students and teachers who are engaged in that. So if there are no questions, I could leave it to other members of our little collective here, if anyone has any parting words.
I did have one last thing. I did have one last thing to say. Well, Tom, thank you for your vision and sort of being the connective tissue between all of these organizations. We couldn't have done this without you. And thank you all to the presenters. I look forward to helping you guys to prune your oral histories and to identify a few more resources. I have some Mary Seymour resources, for example, that I'm happy to share. And I invite all of you to help us tell some of these stories in the Shade Tobacco exhibit that we're going to be co-curating. And just to remind you all that I'm here as the scholar advisor, so feel free to reach out if you're stuck with primary sources, or again, just sort of need, just sort of help map some of the 1950 census or identify, shade tobacco workers. In that census, I have most of the Jamaican workers as well during the war. So bravo to all of you, and thanks again, Tom.
Yeah, and I want to again thank all of you, Elena, Jason, Fiona, and Anne. They're academic historians. They're all trained as academic historians, but they're public historians. Not every academic historian does that. Shame. But I think part of the idea of this project, that I think in some ways it's been very successful, is putting together a group of historians, teachers, and students. I think they've been really important part of this. And Kayla and Lily, thanks so much for being a part of this program and seeing what kind of great ideas can kind of come from that kind of mixture.
All right.
So grateful to learn from all the teachers and museum folks in the room and students. It's just I learned so much from my peers, and it's also just such a delight because you can't be in other people's classrooms, and I just love these opportunities to watch great educators in action. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us. It's great.
Yes, thanks, and stay tuned for the next edition. And yes, though, all this stuff, you know, all of us are working this to share this information and take this well-studied kind of area of Connecticut history and put it in the classroom and put it in our museums and historical societies. So with that, shall we sign off?
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.